All right, everybody, welcome back to Fantasy Baseball Picks and Bets here at the Mayo Media Net. It's Corked Stats and your host, John Laghezza, the big dude with the big mouth from the Big Apple. Going to bring you something a little bit different. You know, we were there with the top couple of outfielders. There's so much player breakdowns. I think, you know, again, I just like to add more value than anything. You can see we've got a little special, little guest, and when I'm talking about adding value, the champ is here. We're going to be talking auction, something that I'm relatively new to, but I am just hooked. So who better to talk to than a national champion? We have NFBC overall auction champ and my good friend, Zack Waxman. What is up? You can find him on the Bird app at Zack Wax. I struggle with this all the time, Zack. I apologize for it. It's ZACKWAXX. I often confuse the H and the K. I don't mean anything by it. How are you, my man? Miss you.
Hey, what's up, John?
It's really good to see you, you know. And again, Zack, you and I hooked up in the space around the same time. We're both a little weird. We both don't mind pushing up against the greater kind of narratives. And to see the success that you've had in the weird way that you've done it. Like, again, you know, it's not to poke at you because I do things my own way. And I'm very unabashed about that. And it's probably one of the reasons why you and I align, right? We're very different, but in being different, we're kind of the same. So to see you succeed, it sounds weird. I hope you don't take it the wrong way. I'm not patronizing you. Like, I'm proud of you. And that sounds weird because one of the things that we've learned together is just how tough the high stakes arena NFBC can be. And that's why when I mentioned adding value at the top, sometimes one of the things I'm learning, again, in real time, theory, greater than sign player analysis. And this is coming from me. Like, I'm Mr. Granular Player Analysis. And I admit that, and I love it, and I enjoy it, and I think it's very important. But the more I learn about the game at large, the more I learn without the proper strategy, you're not going to do very well. Our living example last year, Zack, from what I understand, just because you had Aaron Judge didn't mean that you won, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I didn't.
So it's about putting the pieces together. Everybody's used to redraft. I want to talk to auctions because, again, you have an overall win. There is no lucking into overall anything in NFBC. So right off the bat, what do you like about them? I'm going to assume that you like them more than redraft because I do. And I think it plays into your creative personality. So what do you like about auctions so much? Let's sell people on auction style formats.
Auctions are the Cadillac of fantasy baseball. They're chess versus the checkers of snakes. Auctions, you have more flexibility to take advantage of not falling values, but just inefficiencies in the market. Whereas a snake draft, you're sort of confined into how it goes. You can dictate what happens in an auction more than you can in a snake, and you can execute a strategy with less luck involved in an auction. And I think those are obvious points. You can come in, you can go in with a plan and almost execute it exactly how you want to. Give or take a couple things.
Yeah. To me, that's reflected in you were alluding to it in the exposure to the entire player pool. And here's a pitfall people that I've had. I know, again, I do analysis at a high level and I'm like, I have a show. So people assume I'm like this great fantasy baseball player. I think I'm a good fantasy baseball player, but I've noticed, again, NFBC is very difficult and you better start learning. So what I noticed, Zack, is because I like to draft at the back end, right? I'm like a wheel player or whatever. I noticed there are entire swaths of players that you really can't have. It sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth, right? If you have the 15th overall pick, there were those guys that go at the end of the turn, the 2-3 turn, the next one, that there's just no possibility for as many drafts as you and I do that those guys ever land to you. So you kind of intuitively cross them off your board. And that creates blind spots, and an auction allows you to get at everyone. So really, people, he's not kidding. It is the absolute best. Again, what if I want Ronald Acuna, but I didn't get the first pick? Sorry, Charlie. Well, in a very high stakes league, I think we should all have the ability to vie for these players. And that's kind of what we're getting at, where he talks about it being more fair and me talking about exposure to the pool. So I really like that auctions allow you to get at everybody. Now, let's lead them right into it, Zack. If they're going to start playing, I, of course, right off the bat, was very nervous as a newbie about the first pick, right? Because I think that feels like the first place to mess up, right? The very first place. And I think, and more in particular, it'd be about overpaying on the first pick. That was my big concern. I'm kind of a cheapskate in real life, and I feel like that lends itself also to this. So, can you speak to us about the first pick? Again, remember, people, it's not necessarily the first pick. I'm talking about the highest overall player. So let's talk about J-Ram. Talk to me about Acuna. Talk to me about guys like that. If you want them, Zach, is there a number in your head where you draw the line and say, I'm not going to overspend? It's a $260 budget, mind you, people.
Right. And just for clarification, we're talking about 15-team leagues, right? In the NFBC, I don't think I've done any 12-team auctions in the NFBC, and that's really what all I'm talking about is NFBC, because really that's the only place you can really compare apples to apples. I don't know, like if you're doing a Yahoo auction, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know if you're doing it with your cousin or your friends, whatever, what all the settings are. It's all jumbled up, whatever to me. So we're looking at the NFBC high stakes leagues. 15-team leagues. I know there are some 12-team points auctions that I've done before, but really just the 15-team, like there's $1,500 auctions and there's the 150 online auction championship. So that's what we're talking about. And I've done, I think, 8 of them already, the online auction championships. And when you're looking at those top echelon players, it's really hard to pay for. Like, definitely you can't take 2 of them, in my opinion, and still be able to build a balanced team. So you really, despite whether or not you think you're getting value on these players, and we'll get into the numbers, but just taking more than one of these top players really handcuffs you for the rest of your drafts. You can't do a stars and scrubs, and I've played the home leagues before. You can do that on Yahoo because the benches aren't as deep, waiver wires more accessible. You cannot do that in these leagues. You can't buy 4 top 2-round players and just go scrubs the rest of your team will be fucked. And I've learned that the hard way in some instances, and I've seen teams do that. As for these players, I really don't want to go above like $45 on anyone to start your team. And granted, like when I've played home leagues, and that's where I started, you could go in the 50s in those and still be successful. You can't do that here in these leagues, in my opinion, and still build a good team. And really, I think what you're getting at is like when the auction starts, like how do you gauge like what to pay? Like if J-Ram gets thrown out, like are you gonna, like if you think he's one of the top 5 players in fantasy baseball, are you going to pay 40? Are you going to pay 45 for him? And all these auctions are their own story. So I've done 8 of them, so I have the luxury of looking at it, and I'm not going to really target. I really don't like spending on the top players. I like to spread my money a little bit more, but I do like to. I'm not going to shy away from players like in the $30 range, but I really don't want to spend money on those $40 ranges. But the other thing to consider is this is an overall competition. And J-Ram, for example, that's a good one. I have him on one of these teams. I have him on one of 8 teams. I paid $42 for him in that one league. And just knowing that he's going for 45, 46 in a lot of these other leagues, and in that same auction, it's all relative. It's kind of 3-dimensional. It's all relative to the other leagues as well. Like I'm getting a good value on J-Ram, so I'm going to be able to build a J-Ram team advantageously with that cost, right? But also within that draft, Bobby Witt Jr. went for $42 also. So I'm just looking at what you're sort of, it's a feeling out period. What are these players going for? And unless you're really avoiding someone, you can I did an auction last night, and there certain drafts people are spending more money on top players. Like in this draft that I did last night, for example, players were expensive. So players were going for $49, like Acuna and J Rod. One of those 2 went for 49, and you saw you even saw Judge go for 49 too. So I'm not necessarily targeting any top players, but I do not want to get shut out of them. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for relative values in that top tier. Unless there's a player that I'm specifically lower on than the crowd, like I'll give you the player Juan Soto. Like I'm really not getting him regardless of like what he goes for in these drafts. But like with all those prices I just told you about, I ended up getting Jordan Alvarez, who's not really a target for me, for $38. So there's always going to be 1 or 2 that falls to you in that range, but you don't. But again, if that, you might not get that player, somebody else might get that player. So you don't want to get shut out of that tier entirely, but at the same time, you don't want to be buying 2 players for $42 plus. It really
Yeah.
handcuffs you, and you really don't want to be like at 4 players with $30 plus. So even though like there's been times where Mookie Betts has been like $32, and I've already had like three over $30 players. It's just like somebody else is getting that deal because it's going to screw me over later.
Yeah, well, I was really glad you started to put the numbers on it, because that, again, is one of the translations that we have to make. I like that there is kind of a singular understanding, a currency, actually a dollar value in this case. But to what you were mentioning and how I have applied it myself, that was the one thing I really wanted to get to. Again, I was a new auction player, but I'm not a new fantasy player, right? So I have a really good understanding of relative depth, positions, all the things you could want to know. And I kind of found something similar to you, just maybe saying it a little bit differently, trying to find the value in the first round. And again, people, if you do want to get into this, Zach, I do a lot of like 101 tutorial kind of stuff. So you want to be going to NFBC using their website, right? So it's NFC in a Google machine. Their ADP, first of all, is the best because it has the most volume right now, and probably the best players. So they also have a specific auction tab that you want to put in. It says average auction values, right? So where it says all drafts, you look for the auction one, and it will quite literally give you the average price, the min price, the max price. And you could validate this or invalidate it when you go, Zach. I have found the numbers are very good. Again, nothing is perfect. Like you said, there's an element of fluidity. But you can look at the average numbers and say, I think this player might be off $1 or $2, even without really understanding it, right? Look, I had no understanding last year. I saw top players are going for 45. I saw Bryce Harper towards the end of the first, similar to what you were saying. Alvarez, in the fact we're talking about pick 10, 11, 12, right? Not the tippity top, but also not really a second rounder, where maybe they're not the 45, where maybe you get them for 38, 39. That's smidge under 40. You mentioned Jordan for 38. I got Bryce Harper was my first nomination. I got him for 38 as well. So to the newbies out there, I think that's a great place to start. I, of course, sometimes I think I'm going to outsmart the world, whatever. Maybe I could win this without any first round players or first 2 round players. And thinking like I'm going to win with like $20 players. And I think you really want a player or two in the 30s, right? Think about doing a draft and not having a first or second round pick. No matter how good you do, it's going to be tough. In draft capital, right? A first round pick.
I think you could do it, but I think but I think it's not an optimal way of spending your resources in these drafts.
Especially overall.
I think what you risk by doing that is not necessarily having a bad team, but not optimizing your resources, because at the end of the draft, there's going to be you'll just have money left over. So,
okay. Well, let me cut you off because this is a perfect segue. You're getting it right back. This sounds like what you might highlight or identify as one of the pitfalls to avoid for new players. Something I know I focused on that you helped me with on your excellent podcast, Draft Champions. Make sure you check it out. He's available on all the awesome networks. And man, Zach, you do a really good job of exposing the industry and everybody out there to some of the best players we've never heard of. And remember, as good as the analyst you know of, the guy putting all the stuff out there, there's better players not telling you their secrets. So that's where you want to be. So anyway, talk to us about pitfalls. Talk to us about pitfalls. Is it not spending all your money? See, here I am thinking, don't spend. Maybe counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. No, there's definitely teams that get fucked up by underspending. And I've talked about like 3 areas of the auction. There's the initial feeling out stage where you don't want to be shut out of that high. I really don't want to be shut out of the high end players, because I feel like that I just will end up overspending on lesser players, and I've seen that happen. You save your money, you want to look for deals, they don't happen. Sometimes the deals don't happen. Like I said, I got Jordan for 38, which to me was a slight bargain. It wasn't anything crazy, but you look too hard for those, and you get shut out of the top players, and you end up spending $25 on say a Suzuki. And then there's the middle tiers, and you got to understand that, like, you got to look at the opponents and see are there a lot of players that have saved their money, and there are certain darling players that everyone heralds as sleepers. Suzuki, one of them. I'll shout him out again. And that, like, maybe he's a target of yours. I'm just using him as an example, but you might not get him. He might be overpaid because people are saving their money and they have their targets like him and whoever else. And you just might not be getting those players. So it's up to you to decide in that auction, are you going to be able to acquire these darling players, or are you just going to get the values of the Robbie Rays and stuff like that that are going between, that are always going between $15 and $17, and you pretty much know what they're going to cost? Or are you better off maybe targeting them and hoping that they cost $1 or $2 less because everyone else is fighting over those same players? And the third part is really just at the end, making sure that you have enough money to get your $1 and $2 targets. And I find myself like sometimes you can't pass up values and you sacrifice the end game, but really, in my experience, it's not worth it to sacrifice the end game.
Okay, so
but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, major pitfall is to be cognizant, or the pitfall is to not be cognizant of the other players spending. I got caught with that in the last round. I was very good with making sure I spent my cash. And that's it. Maybe I should have held on to another $1 or $2, because people at the end, you get a lot of dollar players. And if you're the guy that has 2, you get them. And if you don't have the second player, you nominated a guy you really liked in your sleeper rounds, your reserve rounds, whatever, and you don't get that player. So one is to be cognizant of the cash. The thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you that we hear a lot about on podcasts and, content spaces that cover it is the tiering. Meaning the thing we hear about is don't be too patient within a tier, because the final player could cost more than the original. Zach, I think you might have inadvertently given us an example of that. J-Ram, who I consider a clear, and I like Bobby Witt, but I think J-Ram is clearly a better player, right? It's reflected in the consensus ADP. However, he went for 42. I'd imagine Witt went after that, and maybe people felt, 5 category first round 30-30 type upside is gone after Witt. And where if in a world, again, see, you don't even have to understand all the exact measurements, but if you know J-Ram is 42, Witt shouldn't be 42 also. So can you speak to us just briefly about, that's another level of paying attention that I don't even know if I'm capable of. But we do hear people talk about tiering. I could see it happening at third base, right? Where maybe a guy like if the Riley, right? So if Riley and Devers goes, Machado goes, we know Arenado goes. Is Bregman this like a good example of this tiering, right? Because you could see, we've heard a lot of people say, oh man, Bregman is in that 30 pick space all alone as far as third baseman goes. Talk to us about tiering and overreacting, or should we just go get him, whatever.
Yeah, like tiering is, I think of it more of not getting shut out of the position. I don't really look at what other people are doing. Some people can take 2 or 3 third basemen, and yes, that does impact the auction, but I just don't want to be shut out of these players. And you're right, like some of the last players in those tiers, I don't want to be buying. I don't want to be shopping last in any position. Looking at corner and field, for example, it's really it becomes very tough, and you end up not using your resources optimally. You really just want to have a good grasp on what your values are, or what you think a player is worth, and when a player is at that value or below, you want to just make sure you get that player, and not being really set on a player. Let's say you really want Rafael Devers. Let's say you value him at $33 and he hasn't been nominated yet, but then Arenado's out there and he's sitting for 21, 22, and you're like, that's a pretty good deal. Like, don't let other values, don't pass up on other values just because you have like your target. Like, I have my favorite guys at positions that I want to get in auctions, and I think they're good values, but you never know what's going to happen. All it takes is 2 crazy people to tango over them, and then you're fucked. So
now, hold on. I got to cut you again because you did it again, man. You're making my job very easy today. The next segues into that is into this evaluating using AAV, right? The average auction value, or, what is the theoretical ADP, right? What you should be spending.
Yeah.
You mentioned value. Is there a number that triggers that for you? Meaning, again, I don't think we should be overreacting to $1 in either direction. I think because we don't have a lot of money, every dollar means significantly more. Again, as a cheapskate, I had to discard the $1. If you want a guy for $1, pay the $1. 2, I get iffy. 3, to me, is like a definitive value to either side. So I guess I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
do you have a number? Like you mentioned, Devers at 33, but you really want him. 35, I really want him. 36, I'm out. Or 33, you really want him means you have to ride him to the higher end of the AAV, meaning I kind of view it as very binary. Again, I'm a cheapskate. 33, I'm out. Should it be more of like a band, right? More of like a range? Because I
It
find
depends.
myself unwilling to spend. That's what I'm getting at.
It depends. Let's say like it depends. Like let's say the player is the last player in the tier that like the tier is running out, and I had the target the player targeted. I'll go ahead. I'll go above it. I'll go. I don't really care. Like if I have the money, at the time, and we're early in the auction, and we won't be early. We'll be later because the tier's running out. But if I'm still in a good cash position, I'll go $2-3 over if I need to.
2-3.
However, if I think, let's just use Devers again. Let's say Devers is $33 on AAV. I don't know if he is or not. But if it's in like the second round of nominations and I like him, I'm not going to go over $33 on him because I'm in fucking 10 of these things. So
Yeah. Okay.
like I'm not going to go. I might go $1 more, but I wouldn't go. Less. But at the same time, if I see these players, like let's use Devers again. I'm in on every single player early. My name is getting in the bidding on every single player, no matter what. I'll put the proxy bid in, which is a good feature in the NFBC. As soon as the player's nominated, I'll put in. It might be $4, $5 lower than what the AAV is, but I'll be in on that player. I'll be forcing players to outbid me, and I will take almost any player at a cost. So, example, Devers $33. Even if I have Machado already, I'll throw in a proxy bid of $25 automatically, just at least to get the auction moving quicker. And if I get Devers for $25, great, I'll take it. But it's never going to happen. But there's been times where, like, you look at it later in the draft, and I'll throw in an $8 proxy on an outfielder that has an AAV of 12, and I'll just get them. And as long as I think the player is worth $8 or more, in this case more, then I'm happy, even though it's not really a target for me.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that because that's why I was using those numbers. And that's what I love about this format. And funny enough, we really left out the best part of it, which is the draft, which is the actual draft, right? Everybody knows drafting is the best part of fantasy sports. The actual auction. And again, I have never done an in-person, which I've heard is amazing. The NFBC platform, I don't work for them. I don't shill for them. Me and Derek tell each other, cloudy jokes from time to time. That's as far as I go with them. I get no money for them. The platform is fantastic, lightning quick, and totally intuitive and easy to use. I'm overly compulsive and whatever. I get anxious and nervous and stuff. The very first time it made zero mistakes. They make it really, really easy. But again, you mentioned something that I just got to get to because I want to speak to my cheap nature. But I find also I think I'm a good teacher. So I find it kind of makes me a very good student because when I'm learning, I'm trying to learn the things that will help me instruct. And I found it interesting what you just said about these kind of, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like a low ball opening bid, right? Like a low ball open. Where I never really did that at all. I used to try and bid almost $1 above where I thought it should go to not get the competition and not be like Devers 25 because now I know I'm going to bring sharks into the water.
No. What I meant was not opening bids. These are proxy bids. The NFBC, you were talking about how great the features are, and I'll just add on to that. Is that my nominations are always $1, almost always. But the thing is, you can nominate Devers for $1. And then you could put a $25 proxy bid in. And what happens there is, if somebody bids your on top of your dollar, it goes to $3. But you don't know who's doing that. It still says my name on it. Then they bid again. It goes to $5 because they bid $4, and you don't see that. But my bid automatically goes to $5.
So I don't even know if I use it.
All the way to $25. And as soon as it hits to $25, then if they bid again, then their name will show up, and they'll have the $26 bid, and they'll be the one who bid as of now. And then I could still bid on that again, but that's just a way of saving $1 or $2. Because let's say I put out Suzuki, and I put an $18 proxy bid on him, and somebody's trying to bid me up. let's say it gets to $17. I have my $18 proxy. So they bid again. It goes to 18, but that's still my bid. That's instead, if we're going blow for blow, they would be bidding. I bid 16, they bid 17, or sorry, I bid 16, they bid 17, I bid 18, and then they'd have to go 19. I didn't do the numbers properly, but what would really happen? What would happen is they'd go 16,
Volley.
they'd go 16, I'd go 17, then they'd go 18 instead of it still being on me for 18. Then I'd have to go 19. So if they're not willing to pay $19 for Suzuki, I've just saved myself $1 there by using the proxy bid.
Yeah. Well, and again, what does the dollar mean?
Every dollar matters in this.
Yeah. Well, that's, what's funny. And again, Zach, you're speaking kind of to that fluidity that I mentioned, where you have to be able to balance that every dollar matters, but at the same time, you got to be willing to part with it sometimes. It's almost like real life, right? And that's part of why the game is so great, is there are true value reflections and real-time decision-making that you just don't get in a snake draft. That honestly, once I got exposed to auctions last year, I don't know if you remember, because you have so much going on. It was very late in the draft season, and I didn't really feel there really wasn't time for me to just dive into something totally new. I ended up doing the Widowmaker, of course. My first auction was, of course, like a $400 auction with, overall main event champion Bob Cramatola and overall DC champion Rob DiPietro, and all like Slack is in there. Guys that are just orders of magnitude better at this than I am. But people, just being smart and being cheap and talking to smart people like Zach, I was in first place like 3 months into the season. It was a DC auction, where, again, people, if you're unfamiliar, that's draft and hold, so you can't replace. Now, maybe I could have done a better job drafting, but when you lose Bryce Harper, it's very hard to replace. I'm going to get involved. Yeah, I'm going to get involved in the OLCs that you're talking about, where you do your draft, right? So now let's bring this one home. And again, Zach, thank you not only for your time, but really kind of we streamline a lot of really good stuff. People that haven't done this, I know we've covered a lot of the worries that like I had. So every dollar accounting, needing to balance, right, the yin and yang aside. I know certain people are very strict with their pitching and hitting, I don't know what you want to call it, budgets, let's call it. I have found I can't work under that kind of pressure. To me, that just feels like too much guessing. I'm good playing it individually, building a team, piece by piece, looking to profit. Something fellow Canadian, Rob Silver will talk about, right? Just trying to profit on every pick. You're not trying to hit home run every pick, but if you could get close to return on every pick, you're going to look back and say, "Why won the league?" Just kind of being smart and being safe. So to the end now, right, people, since it's 23 rounds and then the last 7 are reserve, those are a snake draft, right, Zach? That's snake stuff, the last 7?
Yeah, in the old apps, yes.
So talk to me about the reserve rounds, but also if it ties into the very last round of bidding as well. I've heard people that have very interesting last bid rounds, meaning, and again, I just want you to take the floor with this. For some people, the counter intuition, this is why the part I really wanted to make sure I highlighted for new players is you're not necessarily leaving your last player for last, because in round that you want to make sure that you secure, you actually spend the dollar on them. And depending on whether or not you feel like you could drop the players, you save them for the reserve round. So again, just talk to me about the end game. This is something I need help on myself.
Yeah, the end game is fun. You want to be cognizant of what players are going in the auction and what players are generally going in the reserve. So one thing that I'm careful of is if I nominate this player, do I want them? Because oftentimes I'm nominating in the end game players I do not want.
Interesting.
Am I? Oh yeah, a lot of the times, like maybe they're not players that necessarily are like avoid players, but players that don't fit my team. Let's say last night I was doing an auction. I had 5 outfielders very early. I filled up my outfield, so I was nominating outfielders that I liked, but I knew I couldn't afford because I couldn't afford spending another dollar on outfield, given what I already had. I already spent a lot of money on them. So I was nominating outfielders. That's because I had that. But I also want to be careful. I want to nominate outfielders that say aren't guys that I want to get in the reserve rounds. So say there is a player that may or may not be auctioned, and it's a player that, I'm not going to pay $1 for because I need every dollar in this auction to fill up my team. I've already spent probably too much money, more money than I wanted to. I'm not going to throw that player out because maybe that player lasts and I can snag him in the reserve rounds. However, I also want to look at players that I don't want in the reserve rounds and nominate them. But at the same time, I got to realize, am I going to be stuck with that player? And no one else is going to bid on them. So it's really important having your finger on the pulse, I guess like I have a luxury of doing a lot of these auctions, knowing which players like that somebody's always going to want this player. Whereas like I've seen last night, for an example, just because it's recent, somebody threw out Zach Davies. Like they were down to the 7 players they had to draft, and then they only had $1 bids left. So they were either throwing out players that they wanted others to waste money on, because every player that you throw out and somebody goes $2 on, that leaves room for you to have one of you that gives you a greater chance of acquiring one of your $1 targets, because they maybe get down to $1 in a couple rounds and you're at the same playing field, and now it's an even playing field again. So that's something I'm cognizant of. And what you'll notice in these drafts is sometimes the reserve rounds include players that went in auctions and other drafts. So it's every auction is its own story. It's like they're all like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. You never know what kind of crazy people are in these auctions. Last night, two people were somebody put out Fujinami on the, I don't know if I'm saying that right, on the Oakland A's, and he's generally he's never been auctioned, and he's like, I don't know, maybe he's been in the reserve round once or twice, I don't know. And people went back and forth, and he went up to $9. And this was early in the auction when everyone had dollars. Somebody spent $9 on that guy, and that's going to significantly.
He's partly like a draft champions pick, by the way.
Yeah, you get things like that, and you never know what's going to happen. Like one time I saw just like the disparity within the tiers. Like you just want to get good value within the tiers. It's all relative. So even like when you look at closers, somebody spent like generally Diaz and Class A go for 26, 25, 26 bucks for the top 2 guys. Then you get in a tier that like the next best ones go for $20. One of these drafts, Romano went for $29, more than the other, just because Class A and Diaz were gone.
Yeah. There's the tier, right? There's the tier.
Yeah, and they're gone. A couple other ones are gone, and Romano went for $29.
So how about because we are going to have to go in a minute. Yep. In those reserve rounds, particularly, is there anything differently you're doing in the snake part of the draft than you would be in Fab? In general, again, people, what we're normally looking for in the reserve rounds of a Fab league are players with high potential payoff that are very easy to cut. Again, NFBC doesn't have injury slots.
Yeah, there's basically 2 main broad topics I'm thinking of. Is one, you hit it, getting players. You're going to churn through those players anyway, so you really want it. It's a balance between ignoring roster construction and just finding good skilled players.
Is it like rookies and closers? Is that kind of like how we'd oversimplify it?
No. The reserve rounds aren't like, there are some of those in there. Like there are some prospects that are speculated in there, and basically in these 15-team leagues. Just to close off my thought, you're balancing between ignoring roster construction and getting those skilled players versus band-aiding your draft, because it is a 15-team league, and you are going to have glaring hole. Well, you are going to have weaknesses on your team. So you do want to focus on sort of putting band-aids on those positions that you're weaker on. So it's a balance between those 2 things. But you'll generally see a lot of everything. Boring guys like Hosmer. You'll see prospects.
I don't see the point of that. That's funny. Maybe not the exact name, but it really fills the bill of player that I just doesn't. For me, I want to move the needle at the end, because we're going to get another crack at this before the season starts. Right? All types of new information from spring training. I just can't envision a world where I want Eric Hosmer on my team on opening day. So that's where I was wondering if you were going to go that. I'm just looking for excitement at the very least.
But no, everyone's different. Everyone drafts differently. I sort of agree with you. Like in the last draft I did yesterday, I was very weak at corner infield. I spent $3 on my 3-corner infielder. So it was bad.
Wow.
And I had the option of drafting Eric Hosmer as my last 30th round pick.
Oh, it was you. It was you.
No. I passed on him. I did not draft him. I took someone different, and just with a little bit more upside. But like I balanced band-aiding my team versus going with a little bit of something that's less replaceable later on.
All right, so you're saying if I get boxed out of, and again, this is why I want, part of the reasons why I want auctions is because of the way the positions have shaken out. Third base in particular, you know me, I've been world's biggest Austin Riley guy for like 2 or 3 years. This guy legitimately looks every bit as good as I've made him sound like. And if you don't have a pick that's between 10 and 15, you don't get him no matter what. And I want him. And I may even be willing to go up, right? He's probably a high 30s guy that I don't know why he's any different than, I don't know, a lot of the other guys that are 38 or 39. So I just love all that. It gives you the exposure to it. Zach, thank you so much. Remember, Zach, ZACKWAXX. Catch him at the Draft Champions podcast. Follow him on Twitter. Lots of good stuff, actually. More so than ever, man. You're pumping out some quality content. I'm loving it. This is great. This is great, you know.
Thank you.
Dude, all your achievements are actually really, they're really deserved. I think you and I, sometimes we get a get a reputation for being a goofball because we're always kidding around. But I'm not
weird. Everyone else is. That's what I think.
right. But it comes between the lines. Your stuff is very good. And people, why do we like Zach so much? Not because he can tolerate me, but I'll tell you this is the truth. He's on the shortest list of people that immediately will look me in the eye and say, no, like you're wrong. And I appreciate that because, well, one of the things we're going through this before we get out, last lesson, is to be wary of the strength of arguments sometimes. And listen, an analyst's job is to make a compelling argument. Some people are better at it than others. And we have to be careful to not say the entertainment factor, right? I'm not like juggling, but don't let me being more entertaining about a worse argument be more compelling than somebody who's not as good as framing a very good argument. And we're getting a lot of that, right? Analysts they're so certain that they get us certain. And I know I'm guilty of it too, but we're not, right? Maybe I'm not the best because I try and be very careful about my wording, and we always know about range of outcomes. Anyway, appreciate you, Zach. We brought the real champ on. I'm going to try and keep this up and really keep the level of guest up to the tippy top. We're talking about national competitors and stuff. And if not, I'll just be me yelling at the microphone. So rate, review, and subscribe to the audio-only pod here at Mayo Media Net. Keep an eye out for us. I'm not exactly sure what the regular season is going to look like. If you're unfamiliar, my work is at John Laghezza on Twitter, and I just put out my top 625 with 25,000 words worth of write-ups so far. So if you're into that kind of nerdy stuff, you can check me out. It's $9.99 one time. Thank you for Patty Mayo for letting me show my own stuff on your wonderful platform. All right, do all the things that we need about the internet, because remember, no one asks if a host is interesting or compelling. They only ask how many likes you get. So thanks for picking up what we're putting down. We'll catch you on the flip side. Zach, we appreciate you. Have a great day, everybody. Peace.